Good afternoon from London, and welcome to this most important symposium, History, Heritage, and Identity, being brought to you in partnership with the University of the West Indies, the foremost institution of higher learning in the Caribbean. I am Tedroy Powell, the National Presiding Bishop of the Church of God of Prophecy in the United Kingdom, Belgium, and the Netherlands. And I'm standing in representation of the Black churches, in particular the New Testament Church of God and the New Testament Assembly. And joining me from some idyllic location in one of the most beautiful islands of the Caribbean is Dr. Luz Longsworth. She's Pro-Vice Chancellor of the university and Principal of the university's Open Campus. Welcome, Dr. Luz Longsworth.
Thank you so much, Bishop Tedroy, and good afternoon to you in London and the UK, and good morning to everyone joining us from the Caribbean. I greet our Vice Chancellor, all of the eminent bishops and clergy of the churches here present, panelists and other speakers, members of the congregations, all distinguished colleagues, and everyone joining us on UWITV live. The University of the West Indies is pleased to partner with the churches of the UK, not only for this symposium, but in developing a relationship that will bring UWI's excellent scholarship to the diaspora in the UK. The issues around race, culture, history, and identity have risen to the forefront in this unusual year, as the entire world has had to focus on the negative effects of the coronavirus, particularly on people of color all over the world. We have also had to deal with the killing of George Floyd and other Black men and women, and the growth in, or maybe the revelation of, deep-seated systemic racism in places where we thought there had been more progress. In the midst of this, however, we are grateful that these catastrophic events have sparked deep conversations and intellectual discourse, resulting in the Black Lives Matter movement, the Windrush conversations, and a renewed global focus on social justice, cultural heritage, reparations, and other issues affecting our people in the Caribbean and its diaspora. In this context, the partnership between the UWI and the Black churches in the UK is right, true, and just. The UWI, throughout its 72-year history, has dedicated its scholarship to exploring and addressing issues that affect us as a people. Our medicine has developed cures and treatments for issues that affect us due to our heritage of enslavement. The excellent research of the UWI's Caribbean Institute for Health Research, CAIR, on illnesses such as diabetes, sickle cell, and viruses such as Zika and the coronavirus have been world-renowned. Our historians have decolonized and rewritten our history. Our cultural specialists have looked at the value and the roots of our music, dance, and art and their contribution to the world. Our social scientists and Nobel Prize winning economists have examined the nature of persistent poverty through the economic legacy of plantation societies. And our world-renowned climate scientists have led the world in the research on climate change and its existential threat to our societies. It is only right, therefore, that the scholarly work emanating from our institution, an activist and ethical university, should be a part and a partner with the churches in this conversation around transformation through education, with this first symposium of a series on history, heritage, and identity. This is the first step in building our links to the conversation and putting the research of our eminent scholars, such as Professor Sir Hilary Beckles and Professor Donna Hope, who you will hear from later, putting their work at your disposal. I thank the bishops of the churches for their vision and commitment to the improvement and transformation of the people of the Afro-Caribbean diaspora, and for their friendship and their commitment to the University of the West Indies. This is the moment, the inflection point, so to speak, where together we have an opportunity to right the wrongs of history. In closing, I reflect on the poem by the noted Jamaican UK poet James Berry called To Travel This Ship, in which he spoke of the search for a better life, leaving Jamaica and going to the UK on the Windrush. For me, the line that stood out was, "Man, I have followed this little light for change. I have followed it, man." The UWI's motto is a light rising in the West. And it seems to me that once again, Caribbean people have to follow a little light for change. So let's follow this light together. Welcome once again to everyone. I wish for us all a thought-provoking and transformational symposium. I now hand over back to Bishop Tedroy Powell to start us off the right way with prayer.
Thank you so much, Dr. Luz. It is a joy to be collaborating with you, the panelists, and such renowned professors who have impacted so many lives. And so just before I pray, I would just love to say the raging debates on Black Lives Matter and critical race theory all find historical antecedents in the atrocities of the Transatlantic Slave Trade and British colonization of the Caribbean, in which the established church was complicit. And it's to that end that I pray in this series of symposiums that hearts will be illuminated, hands, minds, and feet will be empowered to act in the right and the godly way. So let me pray. This is a prayer from Augustine of Hippo. I will pray. Eternal God, who are the light of the minds that know you, the joy of the hearts that love you, and the strength of the wills that serve you, grant us so to know you, that we may truly love you, and so to love you that we may fully serve you, whom to serve is perfect freedom. In Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. As we proceed, it's important for us just to have a concept in mind. And that concept really emanates from words spoken by Nelson Mandela. Mandela says, education is the most powerful weapon you can use to change the world. That is so true, because education informs our intellect, and our intellect influences our belief and behavior or our actions. And so the thrust of this symposia is to influence education for empowerment. And from there, we will trust that we will see the difference in our communities. And so we would love to introduce to you a message from the Archbishop of Canterbury, Dr. Justin Welby, who unfortunately cannot be with us today, but sent this message.
Hello, my name is Rosemary Davidson Gottabed, and I am the National Minority Ethnic Vocations Officer for the Church of England. It is my honour and privilege to read to you greetings from the Most Reverend Right Honourable Justin Welby, Archbishop of Canterbury. The Archbishop writes, "Dear brothers and sisters in Christ, in 2018, Westminster Abbey was the setting for a service of thanksgiving for the 70th anniversary of the arrival at Tilbury of the SS Empire Windrush. The service was a celebration of culture and the contribution of the Windrush generation and their descendants. There was much to give thanks for, but the event was tinged with the acknowledgement of the real injustices suffered by that first wave of migrants from the Caribbean and overshadowed by the stark reality that such racial injustice continues into the present day. This year, the reality of racism has been brought home once more in the series of events triggered by the murder of George Floyd in the United States. What became the Black Lives Matter movement shone a light on the scourge of racism in the United Kingdom and, coupled with the lessons brought home at the time of the Windrush anniversary, in the Church of England. Church and nation are confronted by the legacy of slavery and the slave trade, which requires an appropriate and humble response. In the testimonies I have heard and in conversations I have had, it has become clearer and clearer that action is demanded and not just words. In the New Testament, Jesus teaches repentance for injustice, but also anger about injustice. Repentance means turning around, taking action, and acting differently. The church needs to put its house in order and acknowledge tangibly our historic errors and failure. In support of this, the Church of England has set up an Archbishop's Commission to address racism, and in preparation for this, an anti-racism task force. Your conference is timely, therefore, as it examines the history, heritage, and identity of African and Caribbean communities in the United Kingdom. I would be very grateful to receive any insights or conclusions arising from the conference that would inform the work of the Commission and Task Force. I give thanks for the contribution of the African and Afro-Caribbean people in church and wider society. I wish you every blessing in your conference. I'm only sorry that I cannot be with you in person. In the peace of Christ, Justin Kentua.
Thank you. And thank you so much. And this time we will be handing to Dr. Lewis.
Thank you again, Bishop Tedroy. It is my honor and pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, the Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies, a distinguished economic historian, international thought leader, United Nations Committee official, and a global public activist in the field of social justice and minority empowerment. Sir Hilary was born in Barbados and received his higher education in the United Kingdom. He has lectured extensively in Europe, the Americas, Africa, and Asia, and has published over 100 peer-reviewed essays in scholarly journals and over 13 books on subjects ranging from Atlantic and Caribbean history, gender relations in the Caribbean, sport development, to popular culture. After graduating in 1980 with his PhD from the University of Hull, Sir Hilary joined the University of the West Indies and quickly became the university's youngest professor. Sir Hilary has had widespread Caribbean and global recognition for his academic achievements and leadership expertise. He was called upon by former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon to serve as an inaugural member of the Science Advisory Board on Sustainable Development. He also served as an advisor to UNESCO's Cities for Peace Global Program and was an advisor to the UN World Culture Report. He's also a consultant for the UNESCO Cities for Peace Global Program. For his outstanding academic leadership and public advocacy around these themes, Sir Hilary was invited by the President of the UN General Assembly in 2015 to deliver the feature address during the sitting in which the period 2015 to 2024, which we are now in. However, perhaps for this particular symposium, we would want to focus on his seminal study, Britain's Black Debt, Reparations for Slavery and Native Genocide in the Caribbean. Sir Hilary's bio is probably longer than his speech will be, but we do want to recognize the fact that he has been acknowledged across the world for his scholarship through the award of several honorary degrees from Brock University, University of Glasgow, the Kwame Nkrumah University for Science and Technology, and the University of the Virgin Islands. He received a knighthood from his native Barbados, the Commander Knight of St. Andrew, the highest national honor in Barbados, in recognition of his distinguished service in the fields of education, sports, and the arts. In 2013, Sir Hilary was invited to coordinate the Caribbean government's policy positions on the global reparatory justice conversation. In this capacity, he was asked to chair the Caribbean Commission on Reparations, and under his guidance, the University of the West Indies has also established the Caribbean Center for Reparations Research. In addition, Sir Hilary served as an associate member of the London University Legacies of Slavery Project and the University of Hull's Wilberforce Institute for Slavery and Emancipation. As Vice Chancellor, Sir Hilary has steered the University of the West Indies to the top of the Times Higher Education rankings with the AAA strategy, which guides all of our campuses in the achievement of Caribbean revitalization and the development of a global university rooted in the Caribbean. It is my honor and pleasure to pass the mic to Professor Sir Hilary Beckles to address us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, my distinguished colleague and friend, Dr. Longsworth, and allow me to pay my greatest respect to Bishop Ted Roy and all of his colleagues who are serving and providing pastoral care to all of our people in the UK and Europe and elsewhere. We celebrate your service on behalf of our people, and it's an honor for me to make a contribution to this seminar that focuses on history and heritage and, of course, healing, which is so very significant for all of us. I should begin by saying that for me, personally, this is a moment of convergence in the sense that most of these processes and events that I wish to speak about here in this session, that I can bear witness to each and every one of them. I can bear witness to the fact that as a working class boy in rural Barbados, that I was baptized in the Church of England, the Anglican Church, that was hegemonic in our community. I can also say that I am a child of a village that rose up in rebellion against the Anglican Church and put in place as the symbol of that resistance the Church of God. The church, the Pentecostal Church of God, was put in place in our village as the site of resistance to the persistent racism of the Anglican Church in our community. I can also say that my grandmother, who raised me while my parents went off in the Windrush, that she became the pastor of the church. And I wish to call her name to read her into the record. My late and dearly departed grandmother, Millicent King, who was the pastor of the Redmond Village Pentecostal Church of God in the parish of St. Thomas in Barbados. So in effect, I had no identity other than the fact that I was Pastor King's grandson. That was my identity. And all of this history that I have come to understand was visioned through her social development as a grandmother raising Windrush babies. I can also add, by way of that personal record, that each time she saw me on television speaking about the history of our people, she would say, "You can speak as much history as you wish, but you're going to end up in the pulpit just like your grandmother." So I take this moment to remember her and to speak to the convergence of this moment. Yes, indeed, this is a moral moment. And it's a moral moment in which the Black community of the world is seeking justice for its journey into the future. We have seen graphically displayed around the world and references made to the assassination of George Floyd. But the truth is that just a contemporary image of what we have always known to be a characteristic of our historical past, the way in which our lives did not matter in any social or moral or cultural context. I therefore would like to begin by saying that we are in the centenary of another important moral moment. 1820. We are here in 1920, moving beyond to 2020. And in 2020, we are in the bicentenary of that moral moment when in Britain, the parliamentary group took that decision to go forward in a process to discuss our emancipation. Where have we reached in these past 200 years? Let us look at what actually happened in the 1820s. The Church of England took a position that they were not standing with the Black people of the world. They took a position that they were too embedded into the ownership of Black people as slaves. They took a position that they were too critical to the enterprise of slavery to move against it. And so the Church of England positioned itself in that decade in which the discourse of emancipation was taking place. The Church of England took that position that they were a critical architectural part, economic, ideological. They were too central to slavery to be a part of the criticism of it, and therefore adopted a view that we, the Black people, should remain in slavery. And that was their position as the discussion took place on the floors of the British Parliament. The result of that, because as we know, the Anglican Church, what was then the Church of England, had always seen itself as an entrepreneurial part of slavery. in the island of Barbados, just 2 miles from where I am speaking at the moment. The Church of England was one of the largest slave owners in Barbados through their ownership of the Codrington plantations. And they would brand their slaves, they would brand their Africans like everyone else, and they would brand them on the shoulder with a hot iron that said Church of England. And C of E was branded into their African slaves. It is that history that led the Bishop of Exeter to receive the largest amount of reparations for slavery. More than any other one in England, he collected the largest check for compensation when slavery was abolished, compensation for the loss of property. So yes, slavery came to an end. But then the Church of England persisted in the Caribbean to institute the culture of racial apartheid. So slavery was followed by racial apartheid. And in my own parish church, like all of the other parish churches in the Caribbean, Black people had to sit in the back of the church. So we have 100 years after slavery of sitting in the back of the parish churches, the Anglican churches, Church of England, where we were deemed to be second-class citizens. So out of slavery, we were deemed to be second-class, sitting in the back of the church. And all of us, of my generation, my parents, my grandparents, we were all scarred. We were all scarred deeply by the Church of England as a result of their imposition of racial apartheid following 200 years of slavery. So we came to realize intellectually and spiritually that the Church of England was our enemy, that it cared nothing for us. It cared for those who were our enslavers. It cared for the landlords who wanted our cheap labor. It cared for all of those who were opposed to the moral and economic development of the Black community. It is not a coincidence that we are here and I am here as a member of the University of the West Indies. The University of the West Indies was established in 1948 with a specific mandate that the health of the Black people in the Caribbean was the worst in the British Empire. Indeed, Prime Minister Lloyd George, after he had served in his term as Prime Minister, made the famous statement in 1926 that the Caribbean is the slum of the British Empire, and that the health of the Black people in the Caribbean was not only in critical condition, but it was the worst throughout the British Empire. University of the West Indies was therefore established as a medical school to help with curing the problems of public health pandemics, the polio, the cholera, yaws, and all of the malnutrition-related diseases that had ravished through the Black poor. This is how and why the UWI was formed. And of course, it has evolved to the moment today where we can speak about justice, where we can speak about reparatory justice for the crimes that have been committed against us, where we can speak to all of those institutions that have played a critical role in our degradation and in the denial of our humanity. Let us face squarely in the face one important fact. The British secured and enchained 6 million Africans who they imported into their colonies in the Caribbean. 6 million Africans. Church of England, critical to that process, buying Africans, branding them, denying their humanity, classifying them as property, and therefore not human. When the Emancipation Act was passed, there were only 600,000 Black people in the West Indies. The question you have to ask, how do you import 6 million people into a space, and after 200 years, you have only 600,000 remaining? They're less than 15% survival. So let us face this fact, who we are as Caribbean people. We are the descendants, the survivors of the Black Holocaust. We were subject to genocide, and we are the survivors of the Black Holocaust. It's we the survivors of the Black Holocaust, of the British genocide. And, let me give you 2 quick examples. Jamaica, over 1.5 million Africans were imported by the British into Jamaica. At emancipation, there were only 300,000 remaining. In Barbados, 600,000 were imported. 600,000 were imported. At emancipation, there were 83,000 remaining. We're talking about a survival rate of 15% and less across the region. That is why we call it the Holocaust. It is one of the most amazing destruction of human life in the history of the world. But we are the survivors of that. And it was these survivors who were taken across the Atlantic once again to work in Britain, and what became known as the Windrush. And so, having given 200 years of free labor to Britain, we were rounded up again and put on boats and sent back across the Atlantic to Britain to help to clean up the mess caused by the Second World War. So we need to understand the circularity of this labor, from Africa to the Caribbean, from the Caribbean to Britain. My family was a part of that entire triangular journey. My parents were part of the Windrush. I was a Windrush baby. I was part of that process where children were also put on boats and sent back across the Atlantic. So yes, we are all in this. But the remarkable feature of this is that when I arrived in Birmingham City, everything was familiar to me as a child, because the people who owned the plantations in Barbados, who owned the businesses in Barbados, their names were also on the buildings in Birmingham, on the streets, because we were an empire. We were part of the greatest extraction of wealth that Britain had ever undertaken. So we welcome the speech of the Archbishop of Canterbury, but we also have to say that for there to be genuine repentance, there must also be reparations. You cannot have genuine repentance without reparatory justice. And I wish to say something about those aspects, because it would help to clarify some of the important features at a personal level. I was part of maybe 100,000 or so children who were taken from the region and brought into the cities of England. And in that process, we were all de-educated. This was a critical part of our journey, the children. And very little has been written about the children of the Windrush. and the children who Britain had an opportunity to nurture, but sought instead to degrade. We were not given a fair opportunity. There's a great deal that has been written about how the British educational system de-educated the West Indian children and rendered them into the category of educational subnormality. I can attest to that. I attended one of the finest secondary schools in Barbados. Arrived in England, and I was thrown into the worst secondary school in Birmingham City. In fact, it was an industrial school. And that school no longer exists because its reputation was so terrible that there was a revolt against it. And I will read it into the record. We are speaking about the Pitmaston Secondary School in Hall Green, Birmingham. No longer there, but lots of West Indian children, lots of us from Jamaica, from Antigua, from Guyana, we were corralled and thrown into the school, and all of us suffered educational retardation as a result. Because most of our days we were spent doing woodwork and metalwork and pottery, industrial arts, even though we were involved in good professional educational background back in the Caribbean. So we were de-schooled, we were de-educated, all because of the racism of the educational authority. The children of the Windrush were never tested. They were never evaluated. But the experience of the children was also reflected in the experience of their parents. Very large number of West Indians arrived in England with professional skills, professional crafts, and were not allowed, because of institutional racism, to practice their skills, to practice their craft and their professions. But they were de-skilled because they were told that they had to work in areas that were classified as unskilled. And the West Indian adults, our parents, were de-skilled. My own father, who was a master tailor, a professional tailor in Barbados, could not get a job in England as a tailor because the trade union movement did not wish to embrace skilled West Indians into their HR systems. Their position was that we should go to the bottom of the labor market, the unskilled bottom of the labor market. And in that location, West Indians were de-skilled. Those who arrived, male and female, were not allowed to practice their professions, were not allowed to have employment in their profession. But the consequences are significant. The consequences for the children was that many of them exited schools that taught them nothing, that just degraded them. And those kids found themselves on the streets, not certified and educationally broken. From that position, they became the prey of the police. So when we read about teenage boys especially forming vigilante groups to protect their own families and communities out on the streets, trying to live their normal life best they can, and targeted with police, these were children who were broken by the educational system and then became vulnerable to law and order authorities and the racism in that security system. In the case of parents, it meant therefore that the labor salary levels as the lowest paid workers in the economy, they could not go to the banks and get mortgages. They could not borrow to set up small businesses. They could not engage the financial system to be entrepreneurial. They were therefore de-skilled, denied finance, and again trapped in poverty. That is exactly what happened, leading to intergenerational poverty. leading to West Indians being placed at the mercy of unscrupulous landlords and slum accommodation. So de-education, de-skilling led to an intergenerational entrapment in poverty. This has been the experience. And in all of this, the Church of England was silent. They were silent because they had been complicit for 300 years. They did not see the West Indian flock as part of their pastoral responsibility and care. And this is why the Pentecostal movement, as in the Caribbean, rose up in Britain in resistance to this culture of oppression and racist subordination and providing leadership for the West Indian community. And much the same way they had done that in the Caribbean, they continue to do that in Britain to provide a center for moral guidance, for social guidance, for community coherence, and to assist the children in having a stronger sense of who they are. This is where we have reached today. This is the moment that we have reached. We have now seen that the financial institutions are giving apologies for this history. We have seen that the major corporations, the Bank of England, Lloyd's of London, the Royal Bank of Scotland, National Westminster Bank, all the banks that you know on your high street, all of those banks rose up from drinking from the well of slavery and slave trading. But they're still on the high streets. You see them every day. You work with them, you bank with them. But they owe you reparatory justice because they rose up on the basis of the free labor that your ancestors gave them for 200 years. But the Church of England has also issued an apology, but it is not a genuine apology. And I will say to you why it is not a genuine apology. An apology is a statement that is made up into three compartments. The first compartment, you say, we regret what we have done and we apologize for it. That's part one. Part two, we will commit to repairing best we can the harm we have caused. That harm, and oftentimes, is intergenerational. The third part is that we will make sure we take all steps never to do this again. Unless an apology is made up of those three sections, it is not an apology. So therefore, we are sorry for what we did in the past. Not enough, not adequate, unacceptable. Has to be. We are going to participate in a process of repairing the harm we have caused. Material, psychological, social. Material, psychological, social. And that this organization will denounce all such practices and will never again contemplate the possibility of participating in such action. So we do not accept statements of regret. Statements of regret are in themselves inadequate. If there's going to be repentance, if there's going to be an apology that is based on repentance, to be genuine and to be sincere, it has to transition into reparations and reparatory justice. Otherwise, it is not acceptable. So what should that agenda look like? I would suggest the following, that there has to be a process of educational reparations, that the Church of England and all of the other institutions can participate with the Black Church in developing a policy of how best to invest in the education of the children of the Windrush and the grandchildren of the Windrush and all of those who are now a part of the diaspora community in UK. That educational assistance can allow them to access the programs of the University of the West Indies. All of the degree programs of the University of the West Indies are available online through our open campus. And those students, all of those young people who have been disconnected from their roots, should be placed in a position through an education fund to allow for scholarships so that they could participate in their educational advancement in a safe and secure and empowering community within the University of the West Indies, so they could join the 50,000 young students across the region who are currently enrolled in the University of the West Indies. And for the adult population, we are now entering into this business of offering certification, micro-credentialing, and we can bring our adult population into skills training, professional development, so we can strengthen them in their journey in Britain. We can reach out and strengthen our entire adult population to participate in the UWI agenda so that they could strengthen their positions for their future journey. We would like, therefore, for the Black Church to be provided with resources by the Church of England to allow it to build stronger bonds with the Caribbean. The Black Church in England should be in a position to finance much stronger practical bonds with the Caribbean and with the sister institutions in this region. This requires resources. Part of repairing the harm is to provide resources for precisely that, policies of repair. And these are practical steps that can be taken. And critically, the Church of England should become a center, an advocate for reparatory justice. The only way it can show that genuine repentance is to be an advocate for reparatory justice in the English environment, to be a whistleblower, to be a broker, to speak to the banks and the financial institutions and the insurance companies and say to them, we, the Church of England, wish you to join us on board to be advocates of a reparations strategy, to say we repent, we apologize, and we are going to repair. These are some practical steps that can be taken. These are not theoretical issues. These are practical steps that can be used to repair the harm that has been done and the continuing suffering of our people. The Windrush people and their children and grandchildren can be separated out as a special package. How to repair the Windrush generation, how to support their children and grandchildren who are still suffering harm as a result of that. How to make sure that they are given empowerment. Their children are not de-educated, their parents are not de-skilled, how we can turn that around. I am very grateful for this opportunity, Bishop, to place these conversations on the table. But I'm proud to be on your platform because all I have learned about history, about reparatory justice, about the search for truth, about advocacy, about the search for justice, and pursuing justice by all means necessary for the common good within a moral and religious framework. All of that I learned growing up in the Pentecostal church, in the Church of God. And therefore, I attach myself as a product of the Church of God to this program that you are offering here today. I thank you, and I thank you for the generosity of listening to this presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Hilary. We are heavily indebted to you. You have laid a very deep and important foundation, truth, and getting to the very depth of the truth of the journey of people of the African-Caribbean diaspora. For me, eyes have been even more open than before. And I'm sure there are many thousands who have tuned in and have listened to your presentation this afternoon. And they have also been awakened, not only by the depth and breadth of your knowledge, but also that you are a witness to what has transpired, being a child of the Windrush generation And for me, also bringing some very poignant links to my journey, having grown up in the Birmingham area, the Handsworth area, and worked with the Williams family. And as you spoke, you reminded me of someone that I grew up very well with, my brother and I, Oswald Williams. He looks like you look like him so much, and you may well be connected. I am so thrilled, so thrilled. So when we have the opportunity to dialogue, I look forward to that opportunity, because you reminded me of the Birmingham area, the industry, the commerce in that area. And of course, the church which I grew up, which my parents and possibly your family was also connected with, served as, I guess, the standard of moral rectitude. But gradually over the years, the church has sought to take off its cloak of secrecy and become more vociferous, stronger in its proclamation and its declaration, moving into the public square. And as Isaiah would say, to resurrect truth, because truth has fallen in the street and the church had become silent. So, Professor Hilary, we are deeply grateful to you. We are thankful on behalf of Bishop Donald Bolt of the New Testament Church of God, Bishop Delroy Powell, and myself. We are really thrilled that you've laid a solid foundation on which we can examine issues in regards to education, health, economics, and even look more closely at how we can bring social cohesion. The church is possibly one of the more cohesive and cogent institutions in our community. And so we, therefore, have been enlightened this afternoon by your presentation. So we are deeply grateful to you, sir, and we're looking forward to ongoing engagement with a great deal of anticipation, especially on my part, having heard so much closely how close you are to our journey back in Birmingham. So thank you. And so as we progress, we will be hearing from our professor later, but I'd love for us to listen to a poem by a young lady named Shanette Woozen Henry. Thank you.
Gone are the days when you had me bound, shackled in chains, gripped with fear. No longer silent, for my voice I have found. Time to end injustice. Hope I've made myself clear. I work twice as hard, yet promotion goes to another. All my efforts you disregard. Is it because of my skin color? A job well done. You reward me with more work, while to your name my credit be. Then in disdain you wear a smirk, thinking you played a trick on me. You point me to the laws that govern the land, but due to evil, twisted words, my complaints, they never get heard. A strategic plan aimed at destroying the black man. Yet despite deceptive tactics, I remain undeterred. Your subtle approach cracks harder than a whip. It charms, it smiles like a venomous snake. But no time for self-pity, keep a stiff upper lip. In the face of adversity, my inner strength will awake. Your sarcastic tone is so belittling and demeaning, delighting in my failure like an eagle, hunting its prey. But your ignorant derisions on my life will have no meaning. Like chaff on a threshing floor, there'll be one day be blown away. So try hard as you can, but you'll never get me down. No system, no structure, not even your best game plan. Try hard as you can, but you'll never keep me down. This race I must complete, one my forefathers began.
Thank you so much. Shanette is full of energy, but more so, she's focused on a journey of people of color. and she has impacted many through writings, books, and also through her poems. So we're so thankful to Jeanette. And so at this time, I'd like to hand over to Dr. Lewis.
Thank you very much, Bishop Tedroy. And so far, we have certainly been having an excellent morning. And we will be now moving into our next presentation, which comes from another UWI colleague, Professor Donna Hope. And Professor Hope is Professor of Culture, Gender, and Society in the Institute of Caribbean Studies, former Deputy Dean of Graduate Studies and Research in the Faculty of Humanities and Education at the University of the West Indies, Mona campus in Jamaica. Professor Hope is a household name in Jamaica and around the world, wherever there is interest in popular culture, gender, music. She has multiple publications, including 5 academic books, notably Reggae Stories, Jamaican Musical Legends and Cultural Legacies, Reggae from Yard, Traditional and Emerging Themes in Jamaican Popular Music, International Reggae, Current and Future Trends in Jamaican Popular Music, Man Vibes, Masculinities in the Jamaican Dance Hall, and Inner the Dance Hall, Popular Culture and Politics of Identity in Jamaica. She is engaged in multiple academic and popular discussions on Caribbean culture, gender, politics, the creative industries, and music in the print and electronic media in the USA, the UK, Europe, Latin and South America, and the Caribbean. She is a strong advocate of the value of working class culture and has recently published an autobiographical motivational book called Chicken Back Gravy and Such Delights, Life Lessons from My Journey. Her ongoing academic work includes finalizing publication of her upcoming Vibes Cartel collection, completing her Transitory Masculinities manuscript, and a manuscript on the global spread of Jamaican popular culture through dancehall's dance industry under the title Dancehall Scattered Children. All very exciting, and we are longing to read these more recent works. Professor Hope is also well known as a media commentator on cultural, social, and political issues, and she herself has spearheaded talk shows in Jamaica, such as the Breakfast Club, Nationwide, Disclosure, Straight Talk, and 96 Degrees, and is a columnist in the Jamaican Observer newspaper. As a former director of the Institute of Caribbean Studies, she was the program chair of the inaugural Global Reggae Conference in 2008 and organized and chaired 3 international reggae conferences at the Mona in 2010, 2013, and 2015. We can definitely say that they call her the reggae professor, but her work has allowed us to have the intellectual discourse around reggae and dancehall, which was missing all these years. Her key areas of research include youth development, Black masculinities, Black popular culture, cultural creative industries, media and communication, gender identity, and power. And she is therefore an excellent person to address us today in our major theme on heritage, history, and identity. I welcome my friend and colleague, Professor Donna Hope.
Thank you so much, Dr. Longsworth, my friend and colleague at the University of the West Indies. And of course, I also want to recognize our Vice Chancellor, Sir Hilary Beckles, and thank him for that seminal contribution that he has made to this seminar. Bishops of the Afro-Caribbean Churches in the United Kingdom and our moderator, our able moderator, Bishop Tedroy Powell, thank you for collaborating with the University of the West Indies on this seminar. And of course, welcome to all who are gathered here, the panelists, my fellow panelists, other persons involved in this activity, and everyone joining us via UWITV, students, youths, and interested parties who are locked in to the happenings around us in this historical moment. Now, I want to reflect on a few things as I get into my 10 minutes presentation, very brief. The 2020 US presidential elections energized and captured the imagination of a global Black community for several reasons, including the use of anti-racist tropes, read as anti-Trump, as a critical plank of the Democratic Party's campaign, and the highlighting of VP-elect Harris's Caribbean Jamaican heritage, read as Black. The Black Lives Matter debate was also a rallying cry, gathering massive support globally, propelled by the brutal I Can't Breathe murder of George Floyd and the telescoping of lives into cyberspace in this disconnected COVID-19 era. Now, there's an expectation by many across the world that there will be positive transformation in the combative and fatal race relations that have colored the USA's history. We live in hope. Today's collaboration between the UWI and the Afro-Caribbean Churches in the United Kingdom is therefore timely. And I thank everyone for bringing us together. Now, two historical points that I want to underscore my paper with, my presentation with, include the docking of the Empire Windrush at Tilbury Bay on June 22, 1948. And this marked, as all of us understand, the formal start of Caribbean African immigration to the United Kingdom. Statistics show that between 2001 and 2011, the number of Britons with mixed race, white and Black Caribbean parentage jumped from 237,000 to 427,000. Black, biracial, and multiracial post-millennial Caribbean diasporic youth in the UK grapple with identity fractures that their grandparents and great-grandparents faced in the second half of the 20th century. Identity, particularly diasporic cultural identity for these Caribbean youths, remains in flux as at this point in time. So let's talk a little bit about cultural identity. And I go back to the work of Stuart Hall, who himself shared some of the very similar challenges that Jamaicans who relocate to the United Kingdom faced during his time there. Hall sees cultural identity in two very distinctive ways. First, as one shared culture, a kind of collective, one true self, hiding inside the many other more superficial or artificially imposed selves that people with a shared history and ancestry hold in common in the way that Caribbean people do. Now, this kind of thinking about cultural identity would therefore raise up cultural identities that reflect common historical experiences and shared codes that provide individuals, us, one people, with stable, unchanging, and continuous frames of reference and meaning that exist beneath the shifting divisions of our actual history and resulting in a unique kind of oneness, a kind of Caribbeanness or West Indianness that many can hold on to. Now, this identity for many people in the diaspora is one that people have to excavate and unearth using various frames of reference and cultural representation. And this is the version of identity that played a very key role in many of the struggles of the post-colonial era, helping many persons to understand and reshape their world and their worldview. We see, for example, its markers in negritude poetry and, for example, in the Pan-Africanist political project that helped to reshape the region and other parts of the globe in the second half of the 20th century. Now, Hall's second view of cultural identity is one that I use a lot in my own work. And this incorporates a key recognition of the first notion, but also includes a recognition of the importance of key points of difference. So it is built on an understanding of similarity and difference that help us to have a deeper understanding of who we are as Caribbean people in the diaspora, Africans in the diaspora, people who are dislocated and living in other regions. So this kind of understanding of cultural identity would include a recognition of the intervention of history being read as past, present, and future. And so cultural identity then is a process of becoming, an ongoing production of remaking ourselves through the different experiences that are our own histories. We are always in formation. And it is at the site of temporal transformation that we account for the being and the becoming of cultural identity. Now, my work on Jamaican popular culture and Jamaican popular music and its reflections on the organic connections, disconnection, and interconnections between and amongst race, class, gendered bodies is very critical in this utilizing this particular version of cultural identity as its foundation and plank. And so as we sit here in this historical moment and we have heard the discussions coming forward from the other presenters who have spoken, we understand that in spite of and despite of the work of many, many political, cultural, social, and other actors across the decades, the responses over time from metropolitan cultures like the United Kingdom, the United States of America, Canada, and elsewhere, little has changed. Many of the contemporary pathways and processes to identity formation for diasporic Afro-Caribbean youths remain in flux. In the United Kingdom, these grandchildren and great-grandchildren of the Windrush generation are still seeking pathways out of the contested racial identities and the kind of identity politics that continue to plague their lives. At this juncture, the Caribbean and places like Jamaica become very important to them. In places like London and Toronto, Jamaican culture is the representation of youth culture, as opposed to, for example, what happens in the United States of America, where African American culture remains a dominant and competing force. My colleague Lisa Tomlinson postulates that African Jamaican cultural productions of the diaspora are employed as a means of recovering, re-articulating, and remaking cultural identities that have been disrupted by histories of slavery and colonial conquest. Drawing from diasporic dub poetry and fiction, she argues that this cultivation of an African Jamaican aesthetic in both Canada and England play a key role in inspiring community activism, creating cultural spaces, and forging and sustaining cultural identities in Caribbean diasporas. And for example, we can think about the work of people like Linton Kwesi Johnson, Jean Binta Breeze, some of the musics of popular reggae artists, Bob Marley, Burning Spear come to mind, that were critical in shaping the cultural aesthetic for that generation. And the fact that this particular cultural landscape provided crucial tools for the young people of that time to work with. The 1960s and 1970s political and cultural ferment around language and the arts, poetry, music, dub poetry, literary works, etc., created a very important enclave that allowed many to navigate points of cultural relevance from which they could negotiate their identity in a home away from home. And what of today's generation? Youths, for example, from places like London, Brixton, Manchester, and elsewhere in the UK, these Caribbean enclaves, do they connect through this nostalgic return home motif that informed African Caribbean aesthetics of the 1950s to the early 1970s? Do we encourage them to build identity planks from these 20th century foundations that can sustain both the then and the now of cultural identity making? Do we send today's youth to search for that identity oriented solely around facets of the group, of the community of origin? Or do we manage a kind of, what I see as a kind of gymnastic balancing act that accounts for the then and the now and the to be of identity and of cultural identity? For example, Jamaican patois, Creole, as nation language, resonates across diasporic generations in various societies. Today, it resides in contemporary spaces like dancehall culture, which is a core part of my work, the music and the culture of dancehall, Wagwan Jamaica. Generations of Afro-Jamaican youths residing in Britain, the USA, Canada, and Europe utilize this linguistic identity to maintain a key connection with their unique diasporic cultural identity. The contemporary aesthetics of dress, this refashioning of self that is represented in music videos, in documentaries, in Caribbean and West Indian film, are also very critical in this cultural identity. This is where many people find a sense of self and underscore their identity as Caribbean Africans in the diaspora. Visits to cultural enclaves like bars, attending cultural festivals, Notting Hill Carnival comes to mind, are intertwined with these kind of narratives of becoming. And annual Caribbean festivals like Trinidad Carnival, Barbados' Crop Over Festival provide moments of cultural resonance. A newer aesthetic connects many with dancehall link-ups in the diaspora and the region. For example, the Sands Festival, that is a very post-millennial kind of entity, an enterprise. And this is coupled for some persons who are able to manage this with pilgrimages to reggae festivals like Rebel Salute, Reggae Sumfest, and others. For today's youth, we have to underline as well that social media in all its forms provides a crucial platform that connects individuals, a stage and a portal to reimagine selves while connecting with like-minded individuals across temporal, geographic, linguistic, and other borders, race, class, and gender, for example. For some of my current research, I examined the globalizing of Jamaican identity, this very Afro-Caribbean identity, by the expansive and very expanding transnational networks of local identity sites, dancehall cultures, dance industry, and the sharing of multiple sociocultural meanings within this framework. So, for example, here the dance styles of many Jamaican dancehall dancers who are locked in urban and rural poverty here in Jamaica continue to be broadcast minutely, perhaps every second, via cyberspace portals like Facebook in the first instance and Instagram now in the second instance, YouTube also a component of this, to growing numbers of fans, friends, and what I call dancehall family members across the globe. People like Latonya Styles and Orville Expressions Hall, Kimiko Versatile Miller, the Lyrical Team, Elite Team, and many others are connected, for example, to people in London, dancehall King Shortman, DHK Shortman in London, and others beyond in multiple diasporic locations, as well as in locations across the globe that reflect on the connection between imperialist structures and Jamaican and Caribbean identities. And for my work, I coined the hashtag dancehall family that connects through this social media portal connectivity and pulls together a global community, a kind of ideological site of identity making that is broken on these various networks, but which help to articulate a very key variant of global Black popular culture that comes from within Jamaica and goes outwards into the diaspora and other pathways. And of course, in today's world, it's intermingled with forms and sounds like African Afrobeat, American hip hop, and other Black popular cultural forms that provide our youth with various mechanisms of connecting their past, present, future from the Caribbean through Africa and into these diasporas, for example, in the United Kingdom. You must can fling your shoulder and do the bogle if you're Jamaican. And in pre-COVID era for many, make a pilgrimage to dance in the streets of Jamaica. So what do we tell the young people looking on and listening to us? And many young people are looking on and listening to us, many of them coming of age in the post-millennial era, as with many of the students I see in my undergraduate classes. What is this Caribbeanness and this West Indian identity, this cultural sensibility that we want them to incorporate within their identity negotiations? What are the kinds of caches of information that we want them to seek out, and where are these located? For example, and I'll ask the churches here, I grew up in the Pentecostal church, Lindsay Pentecostal Church, and Gillett Street was my first religious home. Still have fond memories of the golden text on Sunday it's taken from. But for example, what does dancehall reggae gospel have in terms of validity for the diasporic religious framework? Is it valid? How does it communicate any kind of sense of cultural identity across these networks? So as we seek to engage youth in connecting or reconnecting with aspects of their cultural identity that comes from Caribbean history and from the experiences of Caribbean nationals in the UK, we must also engage with contemporary manifestations that are being created and recreated in the multiple locations within which they currently exist. As we educate them and take them back to the colonial, post-colonial, post-independence, independence, and pre-independence eras into the slave plantations and across the Middle Passage back to Africa, we must also walk with them forward into this advancing 21st century to complete their cycle of finding home within and without. We must give them all the resources at hand and every single resort that they need in this particular historical moment. Like the West Indies cricket team, the University of the West Indies, our seminal and premier regional university, stands as a key West Indian motif, a signifier, and an institution that beckons the children in Britain and other diasporas who seek to unearth their historical, political, cultural, and related narratives that have informed and continue to inform our regional and diasporic cultural identity. From where I sit, I encourage the young people, our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren in the British diaspora to consider a return to this West Indian home, the University of the West Indies, and to also learn with us about crucial and critical planks that underpin your unique diasporic cultural identity. Marcus Garvey, Walter Rodney, Franz Fanon, Bob Marley, Burning Spear, Leonard Howell, Bounty Killer from my work, and other bearers of Caribbean political and cultural thought. Unearth these meanings in the lecture halls, in the libraries, in the offices, and for today's world, in the Zoom classrooms online, Blackboard Collaborate classrooms, and other online spaces, and of course, in the fields of culture, in the reggae studios, in the dance halls, the Rastafari groundings and street markets in country and in town. Learn about the West Indies that shaped your parents and grandparents, while immersing yourselves into the fountain of that which is shaping you, our unbroken and unending next generation of Afro-Caribbeans in the United Kingdom. And so for me, this moment stands not just as a component of a transformational space in the world's history and in global history, but also as an opportunity to again recognize the connections that we have with our young people and not so young people who are seeking pathways to reconnect and to connect with aspects of their identity and their cultural identity that reside here with us in the Caribbean. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Hope. Exciting call to action to our young people and not so young people to reconnect. Thank you very much for that presentation. I'm now going to hand over back to Bishop Tedroy Powell to introduce our next speaker, who is Dr. David Muir. Bishop Powell, back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Luz. And for me, it is a great privilege to introduce to you this afternoon someone that I have come to love and respect greatly. I've known him a number of years, and Dr. David Muir, as I know him, is a role model to so very many people. And so allow me to read just a brief synopsis of Dr. David's bio. He is a political scientist and a theologian. He's the head of the Whitelands College of the University of Roehampton and teaches public theology and ministerial theology. He's a graduate of the London University, where he received an MA in political education and public policy, and a graduate of King's College, London, where he earned a PhD in political theology. Dr. Muir had an illustrious career, which began as a secondary school teacher in South London, where he taught history and religion before going to the Commonwealth Institute as a head of teaching, research, and regional development in 1988. He also lectured in historical and theological studies at the Simon of Cyrene Institute and political theology and Pentecostalism at the Center for Black and White Christian Partnership in Birmingham. More recently, he taught history and politics at London University, African American culture and history at the University of East London, political theology and Christology at Canterbury Christ Church University, and Caribbean and Black British political history at London Metropolitan University, where he was a visiting fellow. David is a professional coach and mentor supporting young people attached to the Amos Bursary and other development programs. He is a member of Kirby Lang Institute for Christian Ethics at Cambridge University and a UK board member of the Transatlantic Roundtable on Religion and Race. David is a role model, as said before, and I introduce to you Dr. David Muir.
First and foremost, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here this afternoon. Professor Hilary Beckles has given me permission to not only to speak in a way that I wasn't intending to, but he's also given me permission to invoke my grandmother. I'm Guyanese by birth and by sentiment, and that makes me a Caribbeanist in the full sense of that word. I recall back in 1993 when my wife and I went to the University of the West Indies, and I can remember how I felt going there. I felt a real sense of pride. I felt humbled, but I also felt encouraged that I was at a predominantly Black-led institution in the Caribbean that was training some amazing scholars. And while I was at the University of London Metropolitan teaching political history and ideology and conflict in Caribbean education, of course, we used a number of Professor Beckles' books, but I also had the privilege of being responsible for the student exchange. And my students who left London to go to whether it was Mona or to Cave Hill had a real life-enhancing and life-transforming experience. And so this afternoon or evening, depending on where you are, I'm going to be laconic, but I want to speak from the heart because it seems to me that we are in a time of crisis. I think a real series of crises have come upon us. We've heard about Donald Trump, we've heard about coronavirus, and to some extent, those things converge to just highlight some of the difficulties that diaspora people face in 2020. And, you know, I want to come back to this before I finish, but it was one of our seminal Caribbean scholars, C.L.R. James, who wrote back in, I think it was 1948, even before I was born. He wrote a book entitled Note on Dialectics. And of course, you will know that C.L.R. James, Caribbean scholar, communist, intellectual, radical, the author of the classic, The Black Jacobin. But one of the things that C.L.R. James said that's always struck me, when he talks about dialectics, and of course, sometimes words can obscure precisely what it is that we mean. But in this context, C.L.R. James reminded us that whatever you take away from the Hegelian dialectic, whatever you take away from dialectical materialism and its Hegelian philosophical roots, you must at least understand that dialectics are about an insight that is about the importance and having the capacity to speculate into the future. So I just want to park that with you for a moment, that when we talk about dialectics, we're talking about the capacity to speculate into the future. But let me go back. In 1948, in the very, very same month that the Empire Windrush docked at Tilbury, 11 Labour MPs, I sometimes call them the 11 wise men, they wrote a letter to Clement Attlee, the then Prime Minister, complaining that these 492 Jamaicans, and even that for historians, of course, they weren't all Jamaicans. There were people from Guyana, there were people from the Bahamas. And if you are going to do your history right, if you get the documents, you will see where these people came from. But what Murray, who was the leader of these Labour MPs, said to the Prime Minister was simply this, that these people who are coming to our shores are totally unsuited in terms of education, in terms of morality, in terms of culture, and in terms of economy. In other words, these were brothers and sisters who a few years ago had just died for king and country. And now they were told, and of course we had the young Sam King on that. Sam King was in the RAF, went back to Jamaica, was able to get his passage, and he came to the UK. These were the people. This was before Enoch Powell. This was before the rise of the Monday Club. This was before the National Front. 11 Labour MPs. And when I hear Professor Beckles, who I admire immensely, talking about reparations and the Church of England, I think we just need to take stock Because we've got to speak truth to power, yes, but we must also speak truth to pastors, Anglican pastors, who are trying to sell off again. They're trying to obfuscate again with a measly apology. Professor Beckles is right. There cannot be any repentance unless there is reparations. My late friend, James Cone, who died 2 years ago, will tell you that there cannot be reconciliation until there is repentance and there is reparation. So, Professor Beckles, I want to thank you. I also want to say, and it's public knowledge. I'm the now new head of Whitelands College. Next year, we're going to be celebrating our 180th anniversary. And I'm the first Black man in this Church of England institution. But I've got a very, very uneasy relationship with the Church of England for all the reasons that Professor Beckles stated. Let me tell you a story. Over 3 decades ago, as a young secondary school teacher in South London, I applied for a job to become the Church of England officer, even though I was teaching at a Church of England school and I was going to a Church of England local church. I applied for this job to work with the new ethnic minority committee. I thought it would be a fantastic job. I thought as a young Black Christian, maybe this is what God wants me to do. I went for my interview, and my good friends, and Professor Beckles will know him well, the first Black bishop in the Church of England in England, Wilfred Wood. Wilfred Wood led and congregated in his house in Croydon every month a group of Black intellectuals, radicals, and scholars to come and talk about and find strategies to think about how we can improve Britain. But he was on that committee then. And Bishop Wood said to me, he said, David, you were the best person for that job. But the chair said that you were too young, too Black conscious, and too articulate. Well, that was over 3 decades ago. The first one no longer applies. I'm a bit older in years, but to be Black conscious and a Christian is something that has grown ever since. And you know what it's like often, don't you? If you are Black and you are articulate, you are arrogant. If you are white and you are articulate, you are merely confident. We know how the dynamics work. And Professor Hilary has really given us a lot to think about, and I don't want to go over that. But I want to say 3 things very, very quickly. The first thing is that, I've now got 5 grandchildren. My oldest granddaughter, Rhea Naomi, is 13 years of age. Our second grandson, Josiah, is now 7. Our youngest, Torah, is about 18 months, and we've got Nate in between and Josiah. And I asked myself, and I asked my wife this morning, what kind of world do we want our grandchildren to be brought up in? Well, I'll tell you what, it's got to be in a world where they are agents and where their agency counts and matter. Yes, it's not about, the color of your skin, it's the content of your character. I understand that. But I want my grandchildren to be confident Africans who understand their place in the world and they understand their place locally where they are. I want my 5 daughters to feel that not only because they are taxpayers, but that their grandparents and their great-grandparents are owed a great debt for what they have endured, what they have survived, for us to be where we are today. So I want my children to grow up in Britain. This is where I live. This is where I pay my taxes, where they are free to speak truth, but they're also free to be all the things that they want to be. And we all know as Caribbean people, when I was a young boy growing up, my parents had a grip on top of the wardrobe. And as I got older, the grip moved from the top of the wardrobe to inside the wardrobe. And as I became a man, that grip was no longer there. In other words, our parents who came to the UK were planning to stay for 5 years. 5 years turn into 10, into 20, into 40. My father is now 89 and he's still here. What am I trying to say? Well, I'm trying to say that, we have to make sure that we can help our youngsters to be able to speculate into the future, but they must be agents of their own future. In other words, they must be autonomous beings who understand they have a contribution to make. And as a Christian educator and as a Christian leader, I believe that God has given us all gifts. All of us, God has given gifts. And I think that the African has done an amazing thing to have survived what Orlando Patterson referred to as social death, the impact of slavery. And I don't want to go into George Floyd, but we all saw, and Professor, Beckles is often mentioning his words when he talks about a public execution. That's exactly what it was. But hear this, that is a metaphor of how the African has always been treated in the New World, especially in America. In other words, Uncle Sam has always had his knee on the African's neck, choking him, taking away his life, his dreams, his hopes, and his ambitions. So I want my kids to be agents. I want them to be educated. I want them to be free. But I'm a Christian, and growing up in the UK, I had lots of radical friends who used to say to me, how can you be, an educated, Black conscious person and still be a Christian? I guess lots of us get that. But I want to say this, that, Jesus Christ for me is not only Lord, but Jesus Christ for me offers truth, liberation, and a way for us to find peace in turbulent times, but also light in darkness. And as a Black Christian leader, I still believe that Christianity has a lot to teach the world, and that the Black church that I'm a part of, that I've been part of for most of my life, still holds, I think, some of the keys to liberate a lot of our Black communities in the UK. The final thing I want to say is this, and I may not articulate it well, I may not fully understand it, but I want to reference some of our brilliant scholars. I want to invoke Robert Beckford, Professor Robert Beckford, Professor Anthony Reddy, Dr. Gabriella Beckles, my own wife, Pauline Muir, a scholar, a musician who has been to hell and back in some white institutions. I want to reference people like Joel Edwards, Bishop Joel Edwards, Dr. Joe Aldrich. I want to reference Bishop Powell. I want to reference Ron Nathan, who has gone back to the Caribbean. I want to reference my sister, Carol Tomlin, who made the way for me to get my first university job at the University of East London. And I say all that because I want to say something which I don't understand, and it's something that Gabriella Beckles said at one of our Transatlantic Roundtable on Religion and Race said. And a meeting organized by the scholar William Akar, who is the coordinator for the Transatlantic Roundtable for Religion and Race with an American scholar called Drew Smith. And I remember back in the summer, someone asked Gabriella something about what does she mean by diaspora subjectivities. And I don't want to get lost in the terminology of the word. I want you to hear the spirit. What do you mean by diaspora subjectivities? And Gabriella thought for a while, and she simply said, choose us. Choose us. In our day, in our age of global crisis, of turbulence, where democracy is under threat, where our brothers and sisters in Africa and Asia are under threat because of global warming and climate injustice. I think we need to understand what it means to choose us again, because somewhere in our history, in our memory, our psychical DNA has been scarred. And therefore, we need to find a way to choose us. And I say choosing us involves loving us. Bell Hooks has written a lovely book all about love or salvation Black people and love. Back in the 1950s, the philosopher Iris Murdoch wrote a book entitled The Sovereignty of Good. And in that book, she says that philosophers have got to find a new way to talk about love. And I want to say to you, my brothers and sisters, we need to find a new, radical, and creative way to engage in diaspora subjectivity, where we choose us because we love us, because we understand something about our history, our memory, and our existential reality. So let me close. Let me close by reading you a poem. Some of you have probably, you know this poem pretty well. But it's one of those poems that one of our great American brothers wrote many, many years ago. And it's all about shattered dreams. Shattered dreams. And in that, he talks about what happens to a dream when it's deferred. And he ends up by saying, well, that dream shrivels up. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? The death of George Floyd would legitimately cause many of us to explode in anger and in rage. But our mothers, our fathers, our great grandfathers, our great mothers have endured too much for us not to strategically choose us again. And let me end with the great North African theologian, St. Augustine. Augustine said, in troubled times, we need to understand that hope has two beautiful daughters. Their names are anger and courage. Anger at the way things are, and courage to see that they do not remain as they are. Professor Hillary, I want to work with you and the university to try and implement some of the things that you have put before us. I think together we can do great things if we understand that we've got to, again, choose us. So may God bless you all, may God keep you, may God make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you, but most of all, help you to love yourself. Amen.
Thank you so much, Dr. David Muir. Choose us, work together. This is an amazing message that you have left with us, and we thank you for that powerful, heartfelt presentation. We will now hear from Dr. Carol Tomlin, and once again, I pass back to my co-moderator, Dr. Bishop Powell, to introduce Dr. Carol Tomlin to us. Bishop?
Thank you, Dr. Luz. This afternoon is just filled with so many powerful, life-transforming gold nuggets of information that needs to be processed and then once we've engaged with that, that will influence how we engage our communities. Thank you so much, Dr. Muir. You said that the Black Church holds the key to unlocking our communities. And that is so important. And maybe to build on this theme, we have Dr. Carol Tomlin. Dr. Tomlin is an award-winning academic with a long and distinguished academic career, both nationally and internationally. She has trained teachers, educational leaders, managed a range of programs, and taught English communication and education studies in universities in the UK and also in the USA. She's currently a visiting fellow at the University of Leeds and the senior leader of Restoration of Fellowship Ministries. As an ordained minister, she has several years of pastoral ministry as the senior leader of Restoration of Fellowship Ministries and worked as a health care chaplain registered with the UK Board of Healthcare. Chaplains, she is the author of several publications, including her most recent book, Preach It, Understanding African Caribbean Preaching, which had been selected by the Society for Pentecostal Studies as a finalist for the 2020 Numa Book of the Year. In addition, she has co-authored other academic books with Dr. Paul Maccombie, such as The Oppositional Culture, Theory and Race and Class, Distinctions with Black Communities. As a gifted orator, Dr. Tomlin regularly presents at conferences where she is often invited as the keynote speaker. So we are very thankful this afternoon to have with us Dr. Carol Tomlin. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop Powell. Thank you, Professor Beckles. Thank you, everybody that is joining us. It's indeed a pleasure. It's a delight. I promise you that I won't preach, but I cannot promise you that I will not get carried away. This is my favorite topic, and I'm really passionate about our heritage. And I'd like to just begin by a famous quote from Marcus Garvey: "A people without knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots," said the great Marcus Garvey. However, another less known quote from Garvey is, "If you haven't got confidence in self, you are twice defeated in the race of life. With confidence, you have won even before you have started." A friend of mine wanted to know, how did I academically achieve in the British education system, which has failed so many British-born Black students? I pondered the question and I gave her several answers. But I can honestly say it was two things: a supernatural act of God, in that God gave me supernatural discipline. And secondly, I read about my heritage, the heritage of my people. For you see, I learnt about British history, American history, European history, but I was never taught the history of myself. So when I was about 18 years old, I had a real passion, a real appetite for my own history. And I learnt about the African history, the great civilizations in Africa. I learnt about slavery. I learnt about my own Jamaican heritage. Out of many, one people. I was fascinated, and I still am fascinated, about Jamaican Creole. My fascination for Jamaican Creole led my Jamaican mother to call me Kid Creole. And I even made up a poem about her, but I don't have time today to say. But I want to use the term grip. I want to use the term grip as a metaphor. And I was so glad that my colleague, Dr. David Muir, actually talked about the grip. And even today, my mother, who's 88, has a grip on top of her wardrobe. One remaining grip. We threw the other grips or suitcase out. We said, this is a new dawn. So we threw the other grips out, but we still have one remaining grip. The one she carried from Jamaica to London. Someone once said that the Black man must stop carrying the white man's suitcase. And I believe we must teach ourselves and young people that we are no longer willing to carry anyone else's suitcase. Insecure in our heritage and our cultural identity, the passport to life. We must strive today to carry a grip and get a grip, not full of the legacy of slavery and post-colonialism, but a grip full of hope, full of promise, full of a bright future. Understanding that our heritage has already given us the social, cultural, political, economic capital of strength and resilience, because we are a strong people. Together, men and women, boys and girls we must, and I'm emphasizing must, commit to loving ourselves. I loved what David said about diasporic subjectivity. Diasporic subjectivity. But it's not about others seeing us as portrayed in that film when they see us. It's about us seeing ourselves, not fixated on a color-coded class system of superficial physicality, a relic of plantocracy, but one full of confidence, affirmed in our individual uniqueness, made in the Imago Dei. Sounds like Creole. Imago Dei, Latin for the image of God. It is with this confidence that Garvey spoke about that we have to embrace. And when we embrace this confidence, we are released from the bitterness of the past. This is what we must teach our young people, knowing that confidence in their heritage ensures that they will win the game of life before they have even started. We must recreate and forge a new way of being for ourselves and young people. We must, embracing the views of the brilliant scholar Paulo Freire. We must see education of our heritage through the lens of transformation, like a light dimming the dark shadows, a rising light in the... Let me say that again. We must embrace the views of the brilliant scholar Paulo Freire in seeing the heritage that we have through the lens of transformation, like a light dimming the dark shadows, a rising light in the west. So it's time for us to teach our young people, and we must teach our young people confidence, so that they can conquer but not oppress, strive yet act with integrity, achieve knowing that there is, as my mom would say, enough soup in a pot to feed everybody. We must be rooted in our heritage and seek to diverge from the negative internalized self-hatred or self-loathing of our past and converge to the power of agency that lies within. My good friend, Bishop Dr. Joe Aldred, talks about agency, power, the power that we have, the power that lies within. And if you're a Christian like myself, the power that God has given us to literally conquer and make the inroads that we need to make in this life. It is only when we own our agency that we can fully take our place on the world stage, confident about the race of life. We mustn't look merely in admiration, because this is what we have been doing for too long, looking at others, being bewitched by others. My colleague, Professor Robert Beckford, talks about bewitchment, and he talks about even how our Christianity has been bewitched. We have been bewitched, but we no longer will be bewitched. We no longer will negate our own contribution to humanity. We must celebrate our science, our arts, our great philosophers, our medics, and not just our musicians, our scholars, our politicians. We will celebrate, and we must teach our young people to celebrate our heroes, our heroines, like Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. Some people have said to me, why has it taken so long? Why has it taken us so long to discover who we are? Why has it taken us so long to talk about our heritage? I grew up in the UK. I was born here. And when I was younger, because I still consider myself young at heart, no one really told me about my heritage. But I had this burning desire to learn about who I was, because I knew if I knew who I was, I would be in a better position to literally navigate and negotiate the world around me. So I asked this question: why do some of us still disdain our African roots and embrace all things European? Another colleague of mine, Dr. Babatunde Ededubu from Nigeria, a Nigerian scholar, says that one of our problems, including in the church, is that we have literally embraced all things European, and we've disdained everything that is African. But I say, and my message today is, growth takes time. To grow takes time. Because Jamaica, for example, like so many Caribbean islands, only became independent 58 years ago. We must be patient. We must be kind to ourselves. We must be compassionate to ourselves. Some say, forget the past. When you see someone throwing a javelin, they will always step back before they move forward. It's time, as Bob Marley said, to free ourselves from mental slavery, from the haunting prisoner of our minds. So I close with the great abolitionist, Wendell Phillips. Heritage of the past is a seed that brings the harvest. And my final closing, I feel I'm back in church when preachers would say, I'm coming down, and you know it's going to be another 10 minutes, but not today. My sister says, Black lives matter when Black lives matter to us. Thank you, Bishop Powell.
Thank you so much, Carol, Dr. Tomlin, for sharing, open your heart and reminding us of the grip that we carry, the suitcase. And if we were to unpack that and look at the precious values that have been inculcated, that we're coming from the various generations, and really look at that, reflect on them, and draw the lessons. Those will help us in our forward journey. So I thank you so very much for sharing with us this afternoon. And so I'd like now to hand over to my co-host, Dr. Luz, who will introduce our discussion panels. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bishop Tedroy, and thanks to Dr. Carol Tomlin for that inspirational address. We are picking up our grips for sure. We all have one of those somewhere in our homes. Thank you so much. We now move into our discussion section, and it is my pleasure, my immense pleasure, to introduce yet another dynamic and eloquent speaker and member of the planning team, a force in her own right, Beverly Johnson, a successful executive with over 39 years experience in international trade, shipping, logistics, and marketing. She's worked in all aspects of transport integration. She is owner of several companies that link Jamaica, the Caribbean, and the UK and the US. And we are really honored to have someone of her busy schedule as a part of this planning team. She has been quite a force. She has been our encourager as we have planned this symposium. In her own right, she is award-winning, winning the International Women's Day 2015 award for her sterling contribution to the diaspora in the UK. She's won the Caribbean Idea Marketplace put on by Compete Caribbean IDB, winner of the Jamaica Times 2014 Award for International Shipping, winner of the European Federation of Black Women in Business Award. And with all that she does in her professional life, she still has a lot of time to work with community, feeding the less fortunate in Kingston over the Christmas period. She's a community leader in the Black Business Community Initiative, in the Citizens Christmas Gala Dinner in Birmingham, collaborator with the Jamaican National Kiwanis Movement Blood Bank Initiative, organizer of the Food Bank Program, and as she says, a member of the Church of Prophecy. And Birmingham, UK, I suspect that also covers a litany of activism. It is my pleasure to introduce our moderator for the next discussion session, Beverly Johnson. Beverly, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Longsworth. And good afternoon to everyone. I would just like to acknowledge Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, the panelists, and of course, our participants, those of you who felt and saw the importance of this symposium, which seems to explore our history, our heritage, and our identity. It is now time for us to speak to you and to hear from you, since the panelists have spoken, Sir Hilary Beckles have spoken. We would now like to have a response from yourself. So to start our conversation, I'd like to invite one of our youth leaders who we felt we need to engage our youths, because for so long we tend to speak over our youths, but it's time for us to listen to them. I'd like to introduce Daniel Stone. Daniel is of Jamaican heritage and was born in Birmingham. He has a degree in economics and management from the University of Oxford and a master's degree from UCL. While studying, Daniel led campaigns on student access, racial awareness, and equality, and was an elected student representative and remains an active member of his community. At this time, we would like Daniel to just give an expression and to pose any questions he might have for Dr. Beckles or any of the panelists.
Yes, thank you, and good evening to you all. And it's been a real pleasure to be a part of such an important and engaging conversation. And it was also pleasing to hear Birmingham mentioned a number of times during the conversation. I myself was born in Birmingham in the UK, and currently work for the University of Birmingham. And the university is getting excited because in 2022, the Commonwealth Games are coming to Birmingham. And the university has been named as a principal partner, and I'm sure would be interested in speaking to UWI about possible collaborations given the large Caribbean population in Birmingham. So my question following on from that was just around the Commonwealth identity and kind of whether that kind of offers opportunities when we, in terms of thinking about empowerment and reparations, or whether the idea of the Commonwealth in itself is a problem that we must overcome. So that's the first question. And then my second question was just following on from Dr. Longsworth's introduction, where I think she mentioned the idea of the kind of education at UWI kind of being defined by being ethical and activist. And I was wondering how important the spiritual dimension of actually what higher education can offer is for the education that's offered within the Caribbean, given how kind of secularized things are becoming in the UK, whether you'd see a role for combining the intellectual with the spiritual in a way that allows spiritual thoughts to impact every discipline within academia.
Thank you very much. And thank you so much for that question, Daniel. Yes, indeed, in the Caribbean, there is no way that we can separate the spiritual influences on our educational system. In fact, this system was set up based on the church, on churches and the various denominations that wanted to ensure that our people were educated. In the case of the University of the West Indies, there is an emphasis on ethical behavior, on ethical approaches to our interactions with each other and with our people, on a multi-denominational approach. If you ever have or get the chance to visit the UWI Mona campus, the very first building you will see is an amazing chapel that was brought to the campus brick by brick from a plantation in Trelawney. And so we center that discourse. We encourage our students to explore the spiritual aspects of their lives. And we do have a profile of the ideal UWI graduate that speaks to being morally, ethically, spiritually responsible. It is very important that we have that foundation as a way for our young people to move forward in the world. Whatever their choice of denomination, the university supports that ethical approach to how we interact and to how our thoughts are governed in terms of our approaches to the various subjects that we deal with. So definitely there is that influence. It is an underlying influence. It is a part of our culture. It is not one that we at all do not accept and include in our university's curriculum and our own ethos as an important element of Caribbean civilization and development.
We have a question from Kent. In view of Professor Beckles' earlier assertion that the Church of England received the largest compensation on the abolition of slavery, what is the panel's view on the current issue of reparation, in particular from the Church of England to the descendants of Caribbean families that have been affected? I would like Dr. Hope, Donna Hope, to respond to this question. This is coming from Kent.
Thank you. Well, the panel's view and the view that I would put forward is that there is still a yawning vacuum that needs to be closed in the way that the descendants of former slaves have not really benefited significantly from the reparations project. And I believe that this is a part of what we are working towards at the University of the West Indies, with the Center for Reparations Research, as well as with the seminar today with the churches from the United Kingdom, the Black churches that are connected very deliberately to the lives and the experiences and the history of these children and descendants of former slaves. So in a real sense, that atrocity, that lack, in a sense, that reneging on the repairing of that breach that comes out of the history of slavery and colonialism by bestowing the benefits of that reparations project to the Church of England, which has not, in a sense, secured any real benefits towards the children of the descendants of slaves, is something that, coming from the University of the West Indies perspective, coming from Jamaica and the Caribbean, is still a breach that must be closed, and a recognition that must be brought forward fulsomely to those, the Church of England and the descendants of slave owners and slave masters, that this still is an outstanding and long awaited repair that must be dealt with within the shortest possible time.
Thank you for your response. I quite agree. We have a question from Dahl. How do we connect the Christianity that we now uphold, hearing that the Church of England, who brought us religion, also maintained slavery? How do we connect the Christianity that we now uphold, hearing that the Church of England, who brought us religion, also maintained slavery? I'd like to give this question to Bishop Powell. How will the church rectify this situation?
Thank you, Beverly, for raising this point. This is a very most important point for us to reflect on. And so as a church, we have, and over a number of years, been examining our position. How do we line up our theology, our theological reflection with our actions, with our behavior, with our interactions? And how does that embrace all of life? And so for us, this symposium and many other initiatives must lead to social cohesion, which is a part of the process of reconciling God's world to himself. And so some of the actions that have been delineated, not only by ourselves, but as illustrated this afternoon from Professor Beckles, for example, educational reparation, very practical construct that the church, our churches, will reflect on, engage with significant others, and seek then to put these contracts in place to engage with our world in meaningful ways. So literally put, it's not just having a conversation, but taking the outcomes from that conversation, putting the constructs in place. So we're taking it from the conceptual world to the real world where people are hurting, where they're experiencing structural and systemic disproportionality, racism called by what it is. And so the church, being active in it, the public square, will engage continue to engage, and even more so in very practical ways.
For your response, I'll take one further question, and I'd like to take the question, I'm not sure who sent it, but it says, how can the churches encourage members to move towards entrepreneurship instead of if it's God's will mentality? If it's God's will mentality. So how can churches encourage members to move towards entrepreneurship instead of this mentality of if it's God's will? And I'll give that question to Dr. Carroll, for your perspective on our heritage. We understand the mentality we've had. How can the church, as a Christian, encourage us to move towards entrepreneurship instead of just waiting on God's will?
Thank you. Thank you so much for that question, Beverly. I think it's a very important question, and we have to consider a number of things. First of all, I think the Bible actually talks about having a renewed mind, and it's important that the church teaches individuals, obviously through the word of God, that first of all, it's God's will to bless everyone. That's number one. Secondly, I think the church has if you like, a great contribution to make in terms of developing confidence in individuals. In fact, there was a report that suggested that people of African Caribbean descent in the UK actually started businesses more than any other group, but there was a problem with sustainability. So I think it's about this concept of agency, the power within, the power that God has endowed upon us, and having that assurance, that understanding that God Himself is with us and it is God's will for us to prosper. Now, I'm not a prosperity preacher. For me, prosperity is like if you had a child, every parent wants their children to succeed, and that's how I see the Lord. So we don't have to make a gospel out of it. But I think it's critical that the church enables individuals to develop the confidence, the tools, the skills to participate within the sphere of entrepreneurship.
Thank you for that, Dr. Carol. And I'll just give you a response. Margaret has responded that it is so grateful that this symposium has taken place. In fact, she now asked the question, how can we impart this knowledge to our young people that they may gain a better understanding of their history, their heritage, and their identity through the collaboration of the University of the West Indies? And I think it will be time for me to hand back to Dr. Longsworth, while she would then be able to explain to us the possible partnerships going forward that the University of the West Indies can establish in collaboration with the UK African Caribbean Churches for the benefit of our people in the diaspora, those of us who wish to learn our truth.
Thank you so much, Beverly. Yes, indeed. We are thrilled to have this partnership and to be able to extend and expand our relationship with our African Caribbean churches. And through that conduit, to offer to our young people, our not so young people, as Professor Hope referred to them, the opportunity to access the University of the West Indies scholarship, our massive number of courses, our research, our public lectures, and to be able to participate in that decolonization with us as we ourselves are still on that journey. Through the open campus at the moment, there are hundreds of courses and programs that are available fully online that young people can access, and to have a Caribbean and an Afrocentric perspective on issues that they may have studied perhaps or may wish to study, even in the areas of generic studies such as business and sociology and psychology. So we will be passing a lot of that contact information coming out of this symposium to the churches. And I wish to end my participation by just thanking the churches, the Black churches, Bishop Tedroy, Wilton, Delroy, Beverly Johnson, and Sherry Ann from our own UWI Care, for this opportunity for us to be a part of what I see as a big movement to really bring to our young people in the diaspora the work that we've been doing here in the Caribbean, of excellent quality, rated the #1 university in the Caribbean and in the top 3% in the world, a university that was started in 1948 only to help the health of the region. So we are willing, we are able, and we are ready with our grips to come to you, our virtual grips. Thank you very much. And back to Beverly.
Thank you, Dr. Longsworth. Thank you, participants, for your questions. I know I had quite a few, but of course, we have far extended our time. And so I'd just like to hand back to Bishop Powell so we can have the closing remarks. And again, a big thank you for all of you who took the time to be a part of this memorable and invaluable symposium to our people. Here are opportunities, gateways, pathways for further learning about our true identity, our true history, and our true heritage. Thank you all.
So thank you. Thank you, everyone. I'd like to conclude by expressing again profound gratitude on behalf of the Black majority churches in the UK Diaspora, in particular Bishop Donald Bolt, Bishop Delroy Powell from the Church of God of Prophecy, myself, and the other leaderships that have worked with us. I want to thank also the team that have collaborated and in reaching out to the University of the West Indies, in particular Sir Hilary Beckles and Dr. Luz Longsworth, and all the panelists, Professor Donna Hope, who have worked with us and saw the opportunity. And we've reached more than hands. We've joined hearts across the Atlantic and collaborating on this digital platform. But for us, there is so much more that lies ahead. And in going forward, we have some clear opportunities to engage among ourselves, the diaspora, the churches being at the heart of that, to build the connectivity with the University of the West Indies in the great doors of opportunity to empower ourselves through education. Nelson Mandela says education is the great engine of personal development. It is through education that the daughter of a peasant can become a doctor and the son of a mine worker can become the head of the mine, that a child of a farm worker can become the president of a great nation. This is important for us. And so I want to thank everyone for your collaborative efforts. We will be going forward into our next symposium, which comes up next April. And following that, we are having another one in July. So thank all our listeners. Thank you for all our efforts. And so let me pray the closing prayer. Father, I thank you for the hearts of your people, of your children, who have, Lord, listened to your voice, and through our experiences, through your word working in us, making us agents of transformation, agents of reconciliation. We're reaching out, Lord, across the Atlantic, reaching out within the United Kingdom to the Church of England, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Lord, every institution, organization who have heard and are responsive to the beating of your heart, Lord, to synchronize our hearts, our minds, and our actions to your will, your way. Thank you again for the University of the West Indies and the teams that have worked to perform this afternoon on this digital platform. We thank you. Amen.